Hello everyone, welcome back. You're watching Empyrion Galactic Survival episode 118. I'm Enigmius and today we're continuing with our as yet unnamed small vessel build. We started this in the last episode. I don't have a name for it yet, but that's not a pressing concern. Last episode we focused on profiles, general profiles, putting things together to do a bit of a layout that helps us to visualize how the ship is going to look, how things scale, both the overall size of the ship and also how the different parts of the ship work together in terms of the size of this compared to that. This episode is going to be more of the same a little bit. We're also going to do some refining of some of those profiles just to get an even better idea of how things are coming together. But first, I wanted to mess around with the thrusters. These are the forward propulsion thrusters, or jet engines, depending on what you want to call them. I haven't had an opportunity to play around with these up until now, so this is a first for me. And what I wanted to do was, first of all, get them in place so that we can see their size relative to everything else and get a feel for how they scale and how much space we need in order to have them in place. The other thing I wanted to do was to get a handle on the numbers around them, specifically how much thrust they produce relative to an equivalent number of the smaller thrusters that we've had for ages, and how much fuel they consume, or how much power they draw, which obviously leads to how much fuel they consume. The comparison was actually pretty straightforward. The whole idea is that we've got, if you're looking at them from the front, sort of like this, they're 3x3, and then these specific thrusters, I believe, are 13 blocks deep, which isn't really all that important because with thrusters, we don't stack thrusters behind one another and create depth in the mechanic. It's just basically how much space they occupy on the vertical plane, and then from there we can get a comparison. So 3x3 of these guys is one thruster, 3x3 of the other ones, the smaller ones, is 9 thrusters. So we're comparing one of these large ones to 3 of the smaller ones, and what we end up with is that the large thrusters produce slightly less thrust than an equivalent number of the smaller ones, but consume quite a lot less in terms of power and thus fuel. So there's definitely an incentive to use these thrusters aside from the aesthetics. We just have to be aware that we're going to be getting slightly less thrust for the surface area that we devote to them. Outside of that, and the placement of the thrusters and getting an idea of what's going on there, I mentioned in the last episode there were some other profiles that I wanted to fill in order to get a feel for how things overall would come together, and that's what I'm working on right now. Basically, what I want to do is work out the transition from the back of the ship, which is quite wide. It's that large elliptical frame that the thrusters are attached to, and how that transitions to around the middle section of the ship, which is sort of an elliptical tube that starts from the back of the ship. You can actually see the ellipse every once in a while as we go past that area. It's a smaller ellipse than the back. There it is, right there. And it extends forwards until it reaches the very front of the ship, sort of the cockpit area. And then we'll have various different transitions and things going on there. So I wanted to get that transition from the wide part of the ship in the very back to that central tube. I could have just had it like a T-shape and left it like that, but I wanted something a little bit more refined. And in this case, I think we're getting close based on the way that I've built it out so far. Before we get back to that and start doing the refining, I also wanted to take that ellipse at the back, the smaller one that denotes the middle of the ship, and pull a bunch of lines out of it so that we start to get a 3D feel for how that whole thing is going to come together, how it's going to scale by itself relative to the general size of the ship, and also how it scales relative to the front of the ship. And you can see we're sort of doing a little bit of work making that transition from the top section where we pulled the lines out down to that profile that we set up for the beginning of the cockpit section. It's not especially difficult. What we're doing now isn't intended to be the final profile, the final shape that we're going to be working with. It's just to get a very quick, easy, and general idea of what we're working with and how much of a transition we have to make. And in this case, it only steps down a couple of blocks from the back to the front. So it's not something that I'm expecting to be an extremely difficult transition, but I also have to be aware that there's a lot of different things at play here. We've got a lot of different angles and a lot of different curves intersecting at various different points, which makes doing things smoothly and easily more and more challenging the more elements you have coming together into a specific area. So we're just going to do the basics, do a little bit of layout, get a feel for how things are going on, and then we'll leave it. And we'll see if we're happy with it in a day or two. If we're not, change it. If we are, keep it, expand on it, do what we need to do. This is the other side of the ship where we put this little scoop section, finishing off the transition from the back of the ship to the middle. And as you can see quite clearly, filling it in with some of the more refined blocks so we can get an even better look at how the shapes come together. And this specifically, those 2 blocks that I just placed, I knew as soon as I placed the second one, I wasn't happy with it. It's got to go. There's absolutely no way that I could keep that shape. I tried it. There's no harm in trying. Sometimes you don't realize until after you've put everything in place that, wow, you come across something that surprised you and you actually do like it. But in this case, I don't. So away they go. And in this case as well, replacing that top 22.5 degree pair with the 3 block grouping that's a little bit softer, the angle, but also it's got a little bit of a curve to it on its own. And now you can see we've got the top curve and the bottom curve, and they step apart 1 block to the side. That's the transition that we really need to get right, because that's the one that's going to stand out regardless of anything else that we do that we're happy with for this specific part of the ship. If we don't get that transition right, we're not going to be happy. And what we've got in place now is sort of, if you take like a pyramid shaped cake and you cut it into 4 pieces, take one of those pieces and put it in there, and that's what we've got. Not something that we can't find a solution to, we can't do a better job of, but it took me a little while once I had placed it to realize what my options might be. So by the next episode, you should see we'll have something a little bit better in place. For now, I'm just kind of putting it in place because it's the best that I was able to come up with for the time being. And overall, the general shape here with the scoop and the sloping forward as it comes down, I'm very happy with, and I'm looking forward to seeing how it's going to turn out. This is also, like I say, one of those areas where we have to be thinking about the functionality of the ship as well, and whether or not we can fit reverse thrusters anywhere in this area, because this would be one of those spots in the ship where it would make a ton of sense if we had some reverse thrusters to place them there, and then all we have to worry about is the lateral, the lift, and the descent thrusters, which are a little bit easier to place, I find, in ships like this. You don't have to worry so much about front end real estate as you do when you're placing the other thrusters. Already we're getting a pretty good idea of how this ship is going to come together in terms of its general size and shape, the various different components of it. So I'm very enthusiastic about it. I'm looking forward to continuing the build, is basically sort of the key indicator that I have that I'm on the right track. If I'm already feeling like it's a mess, it's got to be changed in big ways, that's when I usually start thinking about scrapping it. And you haven't seen me scrap too many builds. And it's because we do this sort of profile thing where we lay out different shapes and we kind of get a feel for them and imagine what they would look like in a 3D space, but have that reference in the voxel world that we can use to compare against everything else and get an accurate view of what we're looking at. Here's another example of something that I put in fairly quickly and I did not like at all. 2 lines is basically what we get out of that, coming from the top of the cockpit area towards the front. It's supposed to be a gradual kind of curve that was going into place there, and we missed the mark. It's another one of those things where I knew as soon as I had done it I wasn't happy with it, but I wasn't necessarily feeling compelled to change it immediately, not because there's any chance I'm going to keep it that way, but because I know it needs to be changed, and there were just some other things that I wanted to focus on first so that we can continue getting that idea and evolving the design based on what we've got in place. Here we're looking at the top of the ship, and this is another major intersection where we're basically taking that mid section, the elliptical tube, attaching it to the back of the ship, and then making it all transition so that it looks like it was done on purpose and not just like 2 crazy pieces that got glued together, whether they fit together or not. The back section, this profile, I'm tempted to say that this is another extremely important profile in terms of the overall look of the ship, but at the same time I almost feel like it's not. because the angle that you see it from when you're flying around, it's not really going to stand out exactly how this profile looks. And the various different places that you could be standing around the ship doing different things, it's also not going to be one of those things where it's going to be standing out all that often. But at the same time, I wanted to get a general profile in place, a little bit refined, so that we can make that evaluation as time goes on and change it if we have to before things get out of control. We continue to pull things forward, draw lines, and then pull them forward, fill them out, refine them a little bit, get a feel for what's happening, and then as you can see, even compared to what we had at the end of the last episode, we're already starting to see a lot of detail in the finished ship starting to emerge. And it's just a matter of continuing with this, which we'll do in the next episode, and you'll have an opportunity to see how we refine, how we continue to elaborate on the profiles, and then we'll start working on the layered approach that I want to try to making everything coming together. So if you want to be notified about the next episode, the easiest way to do that is to subscribe to my channel or follow me on social media. Links for social media are always in the information section below the video. Feel free to leave your comments and feedback. Thanks for watching, guys, and take care.